Hey y'all, it's Michael and I love audiobooks. Today we're going to talk about how in 2015 I read a lot of audiobooks. I'm going to show you guys my system of reading audiobooks. Audiobooks, like what? Then I started listening to podcasts and I love podcasts. At work, when I was listening to podcasts, I would run out really fast of podcasts to listen to. Constantly kept searching, and then one day, why won't I listen to audiobooks? Guys, I love audiobooks now. Half of my reading is with audiobooks. Listening to audiobooks is a great way to absorb more story. First off, go to your library. If you think books are expensive, audiobooks cost more. Audiobooks are incredibly expensive. Thing about with audiobooks is that they don't go on sale that much, and I don't really do Audible. I only use Scrib, but you only get 1 credit now for audiobooks. I only use Scrib just so I can get like translated works that I can't find in my library. I highly recommend if you're trying to get into audiobooks, go to your library. See what digital options you have. Since everyone carries their phone, I listen to a lot of my audiobooks on phone because I have it at work and I can just listen to it. It's really easy. My library uses 2 apps, which is Overdrive and One Click Digital. They're slowly moving things to One Click Digital, so they're using both of these apps. You'll find out that as you listen to audiobooks and try to get into audiobooks, that you have a lot of idle time, like washing dishes, doing laundry, folding clothes, walking your dog. Majority of the time I listen to my audiobooks at work. I also listen to it in the car. My drive to work is roughly 15 minutes. Going back and forth, that means I would have listened to 30 minutes of audiobook, which is great. If your library doesn't have digital offerings, another format they'll have it on is, for some odd reason, my library still has cassettes. I don't know of anyone that uses cassettes, but that's an option. They also have a whole rack, like just CDs, like physical CDs. And those are great also because you can put them in your car. If you don't have an auxiliary jack in your car, you can just pop in your CDs. If you want to make your CDs digital, it is a little bit of a hassle, but you can put your CDs in your computer, put it on iTunes, and then put those songs from your iTunes to your phone. I am going to tell you guys now, having the ability to listen to audiobooks and comprehend it is literally just like learning how to read, because you are learning and gathering information differently. Especially if you're one of those that like to listen to specific things, go into this thinking that you're reading, like you're learning how to read again. It takes a while. It takes a couple of books until you can get into the harder books, which I'll explain later. You need to take it easy, especially if you're really starting off. Don't beat yourself up thinking, oh my gosh, this story, I can't get into it. That's probably because the book is too hard. Think of this as like levels. I'm gonna show you the level I think of when I'm picking out audiobooks. For me, it took a few months until I can get into the harder books. Don't beat yourself up. Trust me, it's a learning experience. The first thing you need to do is when you pick out an audiobook, listen to the sample. The narrator is so important. The story should be important, but no. When you're listening to an audiobook, the narrator is really important. There is an exception to this. If you do not like the sound of the narrator, you won't like the book. I've only experienced this with one time, which when I listened to Fangirl by Rambo Rowell, kept listening to it for my book club. I loved the story. I did not like the narrator. Next, I'm gonna talk to you about 2 of my favorite narrators. These 2 narrators, if they are narrating a book, I'll like 50% chance I'm gonna listen to it. One of them is Jim Dale, who narrates the Harry Potter series. There's 2 versions of this, of the Harry Potter series, and he narrates one version. Fantastic narration. Incredible narration. He does a really great job. What's really great about him is that he makes each voice really distinctive. You can really tell each character just by his tone alone. He does an amazing Umbridge. Another narrator that I really enjoy is Tim Curry. He narrates a series of unfortunate events. Well, some of them. Sometimes Lemony Snicket narrates it. His Count Olaf is perfection. It is so good. When I read like the book, that is how Count Olaf sounded. These 2 book series are incredible. If you are wanting to get into audiobooks, start off with these. Can't go wrong. It has a great story, great character, and the narration for these are perfect. I do also have another favorite narrator, Robin Miles. But I'll talk about her in one of the book in another book. So I got the system in my head and now it's finally on paper so I can explain it better. So I pick books for audiobooks by how hard it is to listen to anyways. So there's like 1, 2, and 3. 1 is obviously easy, 2 is medium, and 3 is challenging. I have this system because depending on the week, how busy it is, let's say if it's a super busy week and there's a lot going on, like let's say it's the holidays and so there's a lot going on, things are happening, I would pick a book that's really easy. So one, and that's because I don't have to think that much compared to like a book that's what I consider challenging, where you have to concentrate a little bit more. And so I break up genres depending on how hard it is. So 1, 2, and 3, certain genres go into those categories. The way I pick out books is how hard it is to listen to, and that's mainly the way language is used. The more complex the language, obviously it's going to be more on the challenging side. The first category, which is for the easy category, I usually pick nonfiction and middle grade. And in category 2, that's mainly young adult. Sometimes young adult can be really easy and sometimes it can be challenging depending on the author. And then in category 3, for real, literary fiction and high fantasy and classics. Obviously these aren't all the genres, but these are the genres that I pick because these are mainly the genres that I choose to listen to. I rate them also by their length. Usually books about 7 hours and under, that's short. 8 hours and roughly about 12 hours, that's medium. If it is longer than 15 hours, I consider that long. I think that's a long audiobook. The reason why I say that is because you'll be surprised, but trust me, when you're doing the listening experience, it's really long. Let's start with category 1 with nonfiction. If you are trying to get into nonfiction, I highly recommend listening to audiobooks because you'll find out that they're kind of like legit broadcasts. Like you personally listening to the radio, you don't have to think that much. Like, even though a lot of these are thought-provoking and really intelligent, in the way that you're listening, you don't have to catch every word, if that makes any sense, compared to something like literary fiction where the gears are turning. So I have some recommendations for you, and these are just a variety of them. The first audiobook that I've really gotten into audiobook that I was like, wow, I loved it, is Columbine by Dave Cullen, narrated by Don Leslie. You ever see those words that, like, when you're watching a trailer or like blurb on the back and it says the word riveting? This book is riveting. It is completely unstoppable. I couldn't stop listening to it. It is completely fascinating and it is really insightful and mind-opening. This is a non-fiction book that really amazing on audiobook. Columbine is about the infamous shooting at Columbine High School, and what Dave Cullen does is basically shows you and exposes like what you think actually happened, because I learned a lot listening to this audiobook. It's told in this fiction narrative style with like interviews and it's going on as the incident happens. It is completely riveting. Wow, one of the best books I have ever had a pleasure of listening to. It's heart-wrenching when you figure out what happens. It's kind of scary. Like, when you think about it, it's a scary book in the sense that on the edge of your seat and really nerve-wracking. Whole time I was listening to this, I was thinking of my family. 3 of them are in high school and I was like, oh my gosh. The next one is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot, narrated by Cassandra Campbell. I really enjoyed this book. It is a non-fiction science book. It's basically explains the start of the HeLa cells. Now, I have a biology background. These are really important cells for research. I do have a few problems with the books, especially the part where Skloot really puts herself into it. Maybe she took herself out more a little, but that's just like a little small gripe of mine. Such an interesting book. I highly recommend it and you will definitely learn something. The next one is Not My Father's Son by Alan Cumming. This is a great example of someone who's about the book, who wrote the book, probably with some help, and who narrates the book, because he actually narrates this book. I did not know who Alan Cumming was, but then I was like, wait, he's on Good Wife. And I was like, wait, he's the villain on Spy Kids. And this is such a great memoir. It's about Cummings and him dealing with his relationship with his dad and him on this show trying to find out about his ancestry. First off, his accent. His accent is amazing. I was like, yes, keep reading. Like, I really enjoyed it. The next one is Missoula by John Krakauer, narrated by Scott Brick. First off, Scott Brick, great narrator. This one is about the stats of how rape there is really high compared to the national average. I live in the South and here football is huge, but I'm not into football. Like, when I say it's huge, like, people take days off for football games. And like on Sundays, like everyone's watching football. I had never heard of Missoula, but apparently it's like a really huge football thing, so there's that. This book is fascinating. My only gripe with this book is that it almost feels like it reiterates itself too much. It'll tell you about the actual transcript, but then also it'll tell it to you again. So it is a little bit redundant, but what's great about that is that just getting into audiobook, with these repeats, you're not missing a thing, which is great. This is the longest non-fiction that I'm going to recommend, but let me tell you guys, this is one of my favorite books of 2015 and I loved it. You should listen to this. It's a really long audiobook, I know. This is The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, narrated by Robin Miles. Yes, I love Robin Miles. Again, one of my favorite narrators. She's so good. She's so good because she also does Marlon James, the Book of Night Woman. Oh my god, that... Yo, her Jamaican accent is great. Now, I know this book, it is really long. I think the way that Wilkerson handles the structure of this novel is what makes it fantastic. So this book is mainly about 4 individuals during the Great Migration. Don't hear a lot, especially in the American school system. You definitely don't hear about it. Basically like an exodus of blacks from the South moving to states like California and New York. As we follow these 4 narrators, these 4 people, they're from different times during the Great Migration because it spans a great amount of time. She breaks it up, so one chapter would be about one character, the next one would be about another, the next one would be about another, and then the next one would be about another, and then she would go back around. What I think makes that structure great for an audio listening experience is because it feels like it's short because you're constantly moving and it's constantly going, but at the same time none of the chapters are ever too long, so it feels like you keep pushing and pushing, and by the time you know it, those hours flew by. We drove to the beach, which is 4 hours away from where I live. During that weekend, one of the things that I would like to do was just walk on the beach, and I was like, wow, this audiobook is moving really fast. This audiobook is great. I would highly recommend it. Alright, so let's get into middle grade. Middle grade is a great genre for audiobooks because since the language is really simple, it makes it really easy for audiobook beginners. The first one that I'm going to recommend is The Penderwicks, A Summer Tale of 4 Sisters, 2 Rabbits, and a Very Interesting Boy by Jean Birdsall, narrated by Susan Danaker. The reason why I picked this one is because it's really simple. Like, the story is simple, the language is simple, everything about this is simple, and it has this like nostalgic feel about it. So I think it's a great starting off point if you're starting to get into audiobooks. Now the other one that I'm going to recommend is When Marnie Was There by Joanne Robinson, narrated by Susan Durden. Why I recommend this book for middle grade, first off, this is like a thriller. It is so good. This story is about Anna who gets sent off by her foster parents to basically stay in the country for like a summer, who meets her friend Marnie there. It feels like a thriller because it feels as though Anna is an unreliable narrator, but when you find out the revelation at the end, when I say it is sad, I mean it is genuinely sad. It's not too complex, well, language-wise, and the story is so interesting. Like, you trying to figure out what exactly is real is really good. Now I'm just gonna recommend some fun books. I didn't put these in the genres because I couldn't figure out the genre that they were in. It's William Shakespeare's Star Wars by Ian Desher, narrated by a full cast. So this is one of those audiobooks where it's narrated by more than one person. Now for me, sometimes this is like a hit or miss. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad, or it's like in the middle. Like the first book in a series of Unfortunate Events, The Bad Beginning, that's done by a full cast. It's okay. But this one is actually really great because if you love Star Wars, this is done in like William Shakespeare pentameter. It is actually a really easy listen. Another one that I would recommend, like a fun book that I think it's like smooth transition, would be Psycho by Robert Bloch, narrated by Paul Michael Garcia. If you've watched the movie and you listen to this, it is literally like listening to the movie. The movie is really close to the book. So when you're listening to it and you watched the movie already, you won't have a hard time. So I'm picking this one and it's really creepy too. Like, it's creepy just like the movie. Category 2. There's only one genre in here that I mainly would categorize it into, which is basically young adult. Young adult sometimes can be easy language-wise, but sometimes I have listen to some young adults that was like a little bit more challenging. Here's some recommendations. Gabby, A Girl in Pieces by Isabel Quintero, narrated by Kyla Garcia. If you're a audiobook beginner, since it's written in journal form, kind of like Gabby, who's the main character, is reading out her journal to you. It's just really easy to listen to. It's a great, first off, it's a great book, and because I love Gabby as a character. The other one that I would recommend is The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. It's also the narrator too. And what's great about this is, again, Sherman Alexie does a really great job of narrating the book. Since he wrote it, you really do get the experience of it. It's a great audiobook beginner and the story is really good, so I would recommend it. Now some fun books. Now the next one, I read it in book form, but I have listened to the narrator narrate another book, and that is Ready Player One by Ernest Cline, narrated by Will Wheaton. But I listened to Armada, narrated by Will Wheaton. The book wasn't great, but the narration is fantastic, so I'm assuming since Ready Player One was really good and Will Wheaton is a good narrator, so it's gonna be good. I'm going to recommend a book that I think is fantastic production wise because it is so good. If you're trying to step up from the beginning to a little bit more of a challenging listen, I would recommend Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. Now there's different versions of this, but I listened to the one narrated by Dan Stevens. Dan Stevens' narration of this is perfection. So this book is about a murder on the Oriental Express, like it's basically in the title. What's great about this is because there are like 20 characters in this book and 20 like suspects, and so each character is important, and what Dan Stevens does really great is that you can really tell who's who even though one person is narrating the whole thing. It is fantastic. I would highly recommend this because this is narration at one of its finest. I was like, oh my gosh, this is one person narrating 20 people and I can tell who's who just by the tones and the inflections of his voice. Wow, it is great. And the story, trust me when I say you won't be able to solve this, I was like, okay, who is the killer? Trust me. If you're able to solve this, like exactly solved it, let me know because you might be a detective. Now the last category is more of the challenging audiobooks. On here I have classics. Now classics for me are really hard audiobooks, and that's because of language. Again, like writing style and language play a really important part when you're listening, and for me, just because a lot of classics are written with, I would say, like high writing styles and language, it is a little bit more difficult. I'm not gonna lie, like I try to listen to like Pride and Prejudice, it was not working. The other one that is really hard for me to listen to audiobook wise is fantasy, especially high fantasy, and that's because of description. These two genres, classics and high fantasy, you kind of have to pay really close attention to, especially high fantasy, when they're describing so many things. And sometimes with audiobooks, I don't have that luxury of literally like paying close attention, because usually, again, when you're listening to audio, I'm doing something else. Yeah, I don't have any recommendations for you for those categories because I'm working on them. But I do have some recommendations for you for literary fiction. Literary fiction would be the most challenging audiobook level for me because again, it's all about language and writing styles. Like really flowery writing styles get a little bit difficult, so I picked out some pretty easy ones, and then the last ones are like the incredibly long and more challenging ones. First one, it's super short. Like when I say short, I think it's roughly 2 hours, so it is really easy, but it's a great introduction to literary fiction, and that's Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx, narrated by Campbell Scott. But it's also a really good story, short story anyways. Now Scott has this, his voice sounds like a cowboy, so this story, in case you don't know, it got turned into a movie too. It's basically about two cowboys who lands this job going like herding off the herd, something like that, and they start to develop feelings for each other, and Scott has this like gruffy tone to his voice. He sounds like a cowboy, which is great for the book. The other one that I think is a great audiobook is The Dinner by Herman Koch, translated by Sam Garrett, narrated by Clive Mantel. First off, it's an interesting story. It's basically about two couples who go off to dinner. What's great about this is the structure of the novel. The structure of the novel is kind of like the dinner courses. We're about to get into the longer book. The first one is The Orenda by Joseph Boyden, narrated by Alihan Graham Rowat and Eduardo Ballerini. This is a great audiobook. I'll link my video. I actually did a full review on it, but I think it is a great audiobook. I just wanted to mention it because I want more exposure for the book. So yeah, go check out my review if you want to know more about it. The next one is Americana by Chichamanda Ngozi Adichie, narrated by Ajowa Ando. This is a great audiobook. Ando really gets this accent. It's fantastic. First off, the book is amazing, but the narration is really good, and the characters come alive because of the narration. The next one is The Book of Night Women by Marlon James, narrated by, of course, Robin Miles. I don't have to explain to you. Next one is The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Favor, narrated by Josh Cohen. I want to put a spotlight on this audiobook because this book is about a priest, pastor, who goes up to a planet to go teach Christianity. And what makes this really great audiobook is the narration of the aliens. It is so cool. But also the themes of marriage and love and family, faith and religion is fantastic in this book. The aliens sound so good. Highly recommend it. It's a pretty long audiobook, but to me it flew by really fast. The last two books that I'm gonna recommend are incredibly long. This is the challenging sprint type of audiobook, but when you reach the end, they're both great. So the first one is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicles by Haruki Murakami, narrated by Rupert Degas. This audiobook, first off, Degas' narration is really calm. It fits perfectly with melancholy tone of a lot of Japanese literature, so the tone of his voice goes perfect with the melancholy of the story. There's a lot going on in this story, trust me. There's cat, jazz, spaghetti, there's a well, a mind prostitution, there's a lot going on in this book, but I would recommend it just because the tone of his narration fits really nicely, really great. It is a long audiobook, but I would recommend it. Now the next one is an incredibly long audiobook experience. It's 4 books in one, and that's 26666 by Roberto Bolano, translated by Natasha Wimmer, narrated by various authors. There's a lot of authors that narrate this. This is the book that narration wise, audiobook wise, was, I wouldn't say difficult, but it was really challenging because you have to pay really close attention to this novel when you're listening to this in audiobook. From my personal experience, since it's basically 4 books, 4 books in one, and they all interconnect. When I say interconnect, it's kind of important how they connect too. When I started this, I was I know this is going to be challenging because first off, I knew going in that it's literary fiction, so I was oh, this might be a little bit more challenging. But then when I started listening to it, I was oh yeah, this is going to be challenging because the way he describes things, and then you start to notice how things connect. When you get to the end, oh my gosh, this book is really good. Holy cow, it is fantastic. It's a lot going on. I did a full review of it, so that's the system that I use for audiobooks and some recommendations with it. I know it's not all the genres, but this video is already long, so I know. So yes, if you love listening to audiobooks, let me know, or if you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments. But until then, I'll see you guys till later. Bye! Okay. Y'all, this is long. I had to switch memory cards. That's how long this video is. Ugh. Now I'm gonna go get a drink. Not an alcoholic drink, maybe some coffee. Not coffee because it's late at night, maybe some orange juice.